Cacophony, a Trench Crusade short story by C.D. Corrigan. Part 1. Couple thousand of them at least, Klein announced from the lip of the trench wall, a grim surety in the scarred yeoman's voice. They still heading straight for the junction? Ossian asked, working his bent and battered steel brush against the caked grime encrusting his rifle's action. An unceremonious slip and tumble down the mud-slick slope behind their observation post this morning had left him, and, more important, his gear, in a sorry state. Foul, ubiquitous mud was an ever-present reality of any time spent beyond New Antioch's walls, but Ossian didn't need a scolding superior's lecture to spur him to keep his weapons clear. Some lessons taught themselves. Dead straight, Klein confirmed, right where the field mice said they'd be. Ossian grunted, offering a silent prayer of thanks to the Almighty that their duties today were not as onerous as the mice, the cadre of scouts who set to scurrying the blasted lands in ones and twos in search of scraps and whispers that would aid the war. The best mice were ghosts, slipping past heretic legions with hardly a trace to betray their passing. Most, however, were counted as blessed if they survived 6 weeks beyond their training. He worked the bolt of his rifle in a practice motion, up, back, forward, down, checking that he'd cleared the worst grime from its bearing surfaces. It glided as smoothly as it ever did. The yeomen of New Antioch carried trench rifles, not the fine-wrought, precise, and twice-blessed mechanisms of the sniper priests or the other church elite, and so Ossian was satisfied with the rifle's return to familiarity, if not perfection. Ossian moved onto the lens of his scope. It hadn't borne the brunt of his fall, but a smattering of wet droplets were obscuring his view on both ends. He spat on the cuff of his sleeve and used that to take the worst of it off. Then, with exaggerated care, he reached into his greatcoat and pulled out an oiled leather pouch, resting it carefully on his lap before untying it. Within was his most precious possession, a square of bright, clean cloth. He used as little of the cloth's area as possible to wipe the remains of the crud from the scope's glass, glancing down the sights experimentally between each swipe, until he determined that it was clear enough. The cleanliness of the cloth would be nigh impossible to regain once lost, not out here, and it was a resource he would spend only as needed. He was meticulously repacking the cloth into its watertight pouch when disaster struck. The crack of a nearby gunshot split the still air, and Ossian flinched, fumbling the pouch from his lap and sending it tumbling to the muck of the trench floor. A muffled chorus of celebration sounded from down the trench line, another squad apparently victorious over a varmint or some other pest. Ossian lunged for his pouch, already too late to save it, but an armored hand snatched it from the air before it hit, pinching the cloth in the pouch's leather so even the intervening fingers did not soil it. Ossian looked up only to behold a tremendous, bulbous helm covered in lenses and eccentric machina that completely obscured the wearer's features. Emblazoned on their armored breastplate was the crown and sword sigil of the Synod of Strategic Prophecy. Ossian Lamore, a filtered, metallic voice rumbled forth from the helmet. It sounded disaffected, distracted, as if its attention was elsewhere. 5th generation, service, marksman, skilled. Clean optics are vital to your performance. Ossian's mouth hung agape as he accepted the pouch back from the observer. He snapped upright and attempted a proper salute, but the seer was already continuing down the trench line as if the interaction had never occurred. "Trooper Lamore, you made a friend!" Lieutenant Basir's hoarse chuckle sounded more strenuous than mirthful as he followed in the observer's wake, as if a larynx, conditioned to a lifetime of bellowed commands, was caught unawares by the demands of laughter. "Report, Klein!" "Sir." Klein didn't move from his position, the better to avoid the attention of enemy sharpshooters. "A large column of heretics is advancing up the valley as predicted. They'll hit the junction's long-range artillery markers in half an hour if they hold pace. They're hauling something." Basir's patchy, partially burned mustache bristled as the lieutenant frowned. "Field guns?" "Negative, LT. Looks like a shrine or something. Foothills are still partially obscuring them from here, haven't had a good look." "Holy brass." Lieutenant Basir cursed in frustration. "All right, continue to monitor. Lamore, you're going to stick with our new friend." "Sir?" Ossian asked, bewildered. "The fella from the Synod asked for a liaison to command. Already sent some of the heavies to hang around with him, but I need a runner if he wants to get in touch with the bunker quick. And he seems to like you, so hop to it." Ossian pressed a fresh clip of rounds into his refreshed rifle and tucked the empty metal strap they came in into his ammo pouch. Needless waste of material was, after all, a lesser blasphemy. "Any idea why he's here, sir?" "Synod didn't send me a brief, trooper. Get going." Following the observer wasn't difficult. The towering figure moved at a steady pace and had already been joined by the heavies that Basir had mentioned. As Ossian caught sight of the peculiar diviner again, he was flanked by a pair of shock troopers and trailed by a soldier in hulking, rumbling machine armor. Ossian jogged after them in the loping slog of a seasoned campaigner, prioritizing drier footholds on solid flakboard over the most direct path, lest he get bogged down. As he gained ground, he was surprised to find that the procession had stopped, the ad hoc bodyguards turned and waiting for him behind impassive visors. The observer beckoned him closer. "Trooper Lamore," he said, resuming his route the moment Ossian was beside him, so instantaneously that Ossian didn't even break stride. "You would ask me several questions in the next while. I cannot permit the distraction, so I will provide the answers to you now. My name and purpose are not for you to know. My supplementary protection, if it is needed, will be seen to by these others. Your duties are simple. You shall relay any message I require as I perform my tasks. You shall observe the movement of the enemy with your own eyes, lest you need to provide first-hand context to the recipients of my messages, and you will avoid distracting me. If you have further questions, do not ask them. If the answers are necessary, I will provide them. If I do not, it is for a good purpose. Now, we have arrived." The observer had marched them to a ruined gun nest, a ring of earth and sandbags long since blown apart by a nearby shell in some past assault. The damaged fortification had been made redundant by later modifications to the trench network and never repaired. The stormtroopers and the mechs spread out, seeking defensible positions and favorable fields of fire around the cratered position, while the observer knelt in the center and bowed his head. The position was underprotected, in Ossian's estimation, but he was willing to put his faith in the observer's prognostications. The former gun nest did provide one of the most uninhibited views of the pockmarked valley below, from the hazy and distant walls of Isken Junction to the northwest to the battered, broken foothills a dozen miles northeast. The ridgeline this observation post was built upon, high above the valley floor below, was miles removed from any imminent battle line. These days, its primary purpose was to report back to the artillerists of Isken Junction and let them know how their shells were landing. As such, Ossian did not feel overly exposed, despite the vista before him. Somewhat flummoxed by the day's odd duties, Ossian moved forward and lay prone behind the remaining sandbags, resting his rifle between them. He pressed his cheek to the stock and looked down his scope. The walls of Isken Junction filled his view, muddled and unclear from distance, but studded with fortifications and blistering with gun emplacements. Beyond the walls, row upon row of warehouses, workshops, and train yards crammed every acre of enclosed space, and the glittering spokes of rail lines snaked out towards the distant horizon. Iskand was a node in the vast network of supply lines that fed New Antioch, importing, sorting, and dispatching the myriad goods of the tithe that flowed in from around the world. Such places made the war possible, and Isken Junction was defended accordingly. A labyrinth of trenches, batteries, and fortifications spiderwebbed the valley beyond its walls. As Ossian swept his scope eastward, he mentally ticked off the landmarks every trooper in his unit had memorized, vital points of reference for the Junction's gunners to calibrate their follow-up salvos. "Jericho Bronze," a filtered voice murmured from behind him. "Jericho Bronze besets the web of steel. Veil of Innocence?" The observer was talking to himself, Ossian realized. Bile bit the back of his throat as his crosshairs found the procession Klein had been watching. His estimation had been low to Ossian's eye. He twisted the ring on his scope to increase its magnification. Even at the highest power his scope was capable of, the details were well beyond making out. But he could see a narrow column of twisted humanity marching in rough lines, every dozen souls shackled to a tremendous chain they dragged along in their wake. These were slack hairs in his scope's glass, but the fact that he could see them at all told Ossian they must have been massive. Ossian followed the lines of chains as they joined the others, forming great snaking bundles as he swept his view along their ranks. Each was taut, pulling an enormous... What was it? Ossian scanned the peculiar construction, zooming out for a bigger picture before twisting the scope back in. Klein had been on the right path with Shrine, he thought, but that wasn't quite it. The heretics were dragging a gigantic wheeled foundation, entirely forged in what looked to be a green oxidized metal. Above its frame stretched a tremendous cylinder, perhaps a dozen yards across, but taller than even the largest fortifications on Isken's walls. Ossian tracked the green-blue monolith up and up until he saw a dais at its apex. It was wider and stood apart from the main body, separated from the walls of the cylinder below by a small gap. Several gorilla-armed soldiers in serrated armor plates stalked around the dais with oversized weaponry, and Osian suppressed a shiver of dread. Murky as they were at this range, he knew anointed when he saw them. At the center stood a robed figure with an iron headdress, a perverse mockery of the ecclesiastical mitre. The floor of the dais was inscribed with symbols. Osian knew it wasn't possible he could see them. There was no way he could know they were there, but still they made his eyes water, and the rim. An armored hand clasped his shoulder like a vice. The observer. Osian heard a whir click as the lenses in the Oculus helm adjusted. Who stands around the rim, Trooper Lamore? Hard to see, sir. Osian wiped his eyes and squinted back down the scope. 5 people. All in white robes. I think they're shackled.
To me.
The observer did not shout, but the command tugged at Osian's very soul. Had he not already been before the seer, he would have come sprinting through gunfire to be there, and even now his nerves buzzed with the demand for action. Belatedly, Osian realized that those words had not come through the same tinny filter as the rest of their discussion had. The stormtroopers came pounding into the blasted-out gun nest, armor clanking and weapons held ready. A beat after, the mechanized bulk of the heavy troopers' machine armor punched through the crumbling far wall of the earthworks, skidding to a stop before the observer in a clamor. Only after they arrived did the three glance around in apparent befuddlement at their own actions. The observer's lenses were whirring, and Osian saw myriad internal mechanisms cycling and switching as he muttered, enshrouded head twitching like a nervous bird. Could be, no. Probable, no. Obscured. Butler, Monroe, dead. Klein, no. Basir, no. Cook, Wallace, no. Dead. Kimball, lost. Chance of... The observer snapped around and fixed one of the stormtroopers in his many-lensed gaze. All guns of Iskand. Fire on that procession. Immediate effect. Saturation barrage. On my authority.
Go!
The last word hung in the air as the stormtrooper fled the nest, slamming into the trench network beyond with breakneck speed. Too late, the observer said to himself. Beyond rage. Can't see. Trooper Lamar! Sir? Resume your watch. This thing is veiled from me. Tell me what you see. Every detail. Aye. Osian rushed to reacquire the monolith shrine in his sights. 1,000+ heretics hauling a big green tower on wheels. I think they've dropped the chains. It looks like they're falling back. Quickly. They're running. Bronze of Jericho, the Almighty's wrath reforged in spite his works. There's a couple heretics up top, on a platform, see, between the figures in white. The people in white are all chained. They just force one of them to their knees. Death, damned, turd, coward, dead, death, who. Osian watched in mute horror as one of the anointed grabbed the kneeling figure by the head and threw them from the dais. They sailed out, until the chain around their feet snapped taut, and they began to swing back towards the enormous bronze cylinder. The observer hauled Osian bodily to his feet, dragging him over to the machine-armored heavy trooper. Bell of calamity, the observer shouted, his voice desperate.
Warn Antioch.
The unfiltered words thundered through Osian, making his head swim.
Survive.
The observer turned to the machine-armored soldier.
Shield him.
The last thing Osian saw was a shockwave roaring across the valley, rippling out from the monolith, from the bell, towards Iskand Junction. The machine-armored trooper bore him to the ground in a bear hug. Gauntleted hands clamped over Osian's ears like a vice, and all the world was noise and pain. Well, that was fun. Hey folks, CD Corrigan here. I don't do a lot of my own narration or voice acting, but this is just a little fun afternoon diversion project here, so I thought, why not do something a little bit different for the channel? I have no official connection to Trench Crusade, which is a new wargaming tabletop game that's been making the rounds recently, but I love grimdark lore and stories and that kind of thing. I've always had a soft spot for it. And I thought, well, why not? Let's do a little bit of fanfic and have some fun with it. If you're familiar with my work or the channel, you know that I am an artist and a game designer. My game is Relict RPG, which is a tabletop role-playing game. It's a free open source system. Could you play a Trench Crusade campaign in it? Absolutely. Do I have the official capacity to say that that is a thing that can happen? No, I have no connection to the project team whatsoever, but I will say I have been playing around with like a diesel punk expansion for Relict in the background as I work on all the modules and everything from our Kickstarter. So just gonna leave that out there and say you could, and also Relict is free. Go to relictrpg.com and check it out. So that's neat. What you may not know, if you've only known me from the channel and Relict, is that I'm also an author. My first book is called Tattered Pawns. It came out last year. It's a fantasy romp, a lot of fun, really enjoyed that, kind of led to a lot of the other work, and formed the basis of what became Relict. I wanted to make a game that could run my story and my characters, so I did. And my second book is coming out later this year. I'll put a link down below. That is part of a multi-author project called Chronicles of the Crossing. It is in partnership with Storytellers Forge, who did the Black Ballad RPG setting last year. Big Kickstarter, really successful there, and they've hired on a bunch of authors to expand the world and novels and new adventures and all sorts of stuff. So my second novel, The Memory Thief, will be part of that. The backer kit campaign is launching in October, and there's a link below. Go subscribe to it. Tell them I sent you. They're going to love it. My book is called The Memory Thief, which is like a rogue punk story about a person doing crimes in the afterlife and getting hunted down by a lich and making deals with devils and stuff. It's a lot of fun. There's also some really cool other books as part of that, plus other awards and Black Ballad gaming related stuff. That's all going to be coming out in that campaign. More details on that soon. Make sure you subscribe to kind of keep track of that. Those are all great ways to support me. If you enjoyed this story, let me know. If you want to hear more like fanfic stuff like this, I'm open to doing it. It was entertaining. I don't do this kind of thing often. I have enough of my own stuff going on, really. But I don't know. Every once in a while, a new setting, a new story kind of catches my interest, and I'm like, man, I want to play around in that. And it looks like the Trench Crusade guys are really open to authors and creators like me expanding on their world and kind of creating some community lore around that sort of thing, which I always appreciate because that's an ethos we try and carry forward with Relict as well. Anyhow, go check out Trench Crusade, go check out Relict, go check out my books and stuff, and let me know what you thought. This was part 1. I figured this story could be like a 3 or 4-parter, see what happens to Osian and if he survives this whole Bell situation. If people are into it, I'll go ahead and punch out the next couple of steps here if you're interested in more Trench Crusade stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to stop talking. Bye-bye.